Hello everybody, it's our pleasure to bring Brinton Knowledge Series from the House of Brinton Pharmaceuticals. In this series, we will partner with renowned medical experts across the country in the field of dermatology, gynecology, pediatrics and various other therapies who will bring their vast knowledge and rich medical experience. We hope the content of Brinton Knowledge Series would add value and contribute to your clinical experience. Thank you. Good evening, all the respected doctors. Today, we all are here to celebrate World Vitiligo Day. And theme for this year, 2021, is Embracing Life with Vitiligo. For today's Hear the Expert session on vitiligo, we have with us eminent dermatologists of India who are not only known in our motherland, but also represented India at various international platforms. Our moderator for today's session is respected Dr. Sushil Tailiani, sir. Dr. Sushil Tailiani is consultant dermatologist at PD Hinduja Hospital, Mumbai. He is having more than 35 years of experience after MD and more than a decade of experience in use of lasers and aesthetic procedures. He is having membership of prestigious dermatology associations of India and abroad, to name the few: IADVL, American Academy of Dermatology, and European Academy of Dermatovenerology. He is faculty at dermatology and dermatosurgery conferences and workshops. He is awarded with Dr. B.C. Roy birth anniversary at the Economic Times Doctors Conclave. I welcome you, sir, on behalf of Brinton Pharmaceuticals. Today's speaker, Dr. Sanjay Ghosh. He is former professor and HOD of Department of Dermatology and Venerology, MGM Medical College and LSK Hospital, Kishanganj, India. He is presently Director Honorary, Institute of Allergic and Immunologic Skin Diseases, Kolkata, with 33 years of rich experience. He is former editor in IJD, former editor-in-chief, CODFI Bulletin, editor-in-chief, Recent Advances in Dermatology, and co-author of IDVL textbook of dermatology. He has authored numerous publications and various textbooks as well. Our other speaker is respected Dr. Davinder Prasad. He is Professor, Department of Dermatology at PGI Chandigarh and Honorary Professor of Dermatology at University of Rome, Italy. His main area of research is pathogenesis and treatment and innovative surgical methods. He has authored more than 225 publications and about 120 publications on vitiligo only in international journals with very high citation index. He is past president, Asian Society for Pigment Cell Research, coordinator of Asian region for World Vitiligo Consensus Group, and he is member of European Task Force on Vitiligo. He is holding a membership of various scientific bodies in India and across the globe, and he is editor of Dermatology Section, Biomedical Research International. On behalf of Brinton Pharmaceuticals, I thank you, Dr. Tailiani sir, Dr. Ghosh sir, and Dr. Prasad sir, for considering Brinton Pharmaceuticals as your partner for this knowledge sharing initiative. Now I request Dr. Tailiani sir to please take over the session.
Thank you very much for the kind words. Good evening, friends. Vitiligo is a pigment disorder characterized by loss of epidermal melanocytes. Also, it does not affect longevity, does not affect the physical abilities, but it does cause a significant negative impact on the quality of life. And there are myths and ignorance which are widespread in spite of our efforts. And this leads to stigmatization of the patient with vitiligo. Only the other day, I was seen by a gentleman who had a meeting in his house for his granddaughter's engagement ceremony, and well-to-do family. At the end of the function, when everybody was having a cup of tea, his dhoti slipped a bit and he had a chronic eczema with a small patch of depigmentation because of scratching, and accidentally somebody from boys' side saw it and they called off the relationship there and then, and they walked out in a huff. That's the type of problem that this disease can cause. And also, I also offer narrowband UV phototherapy. I got a phone call from a patient saying that aapke idhar वो लाइट का शॉक लेने के लिए टाइम लेने का है. So I was wondering whether I'm giving electroconvulsive therapy to anybody. So despite explanation, people have such little knowledge. Not only do people have very less knowledge, but Vitiligo by Walter Shelley, if it's not an orphan, it's at least a stepchild of medical research. When you see so much of research happening in conditions like psoriasis, and you wonder where disease vitiligo get a short thrift, but luckily there is newer understanding on pathophysiological aspects of the disease, and we hope it changes the things for better. Newer targets and targeted therapeutic options based on this understanding are the subjects of various ongoing clinical trials. I welcome the two eminent speakers for sharing with us their understanding of this disorder based on their original work on the subject. And I would expect all the attendees to get inspired by these talks and use the information for better management of this very important condition. With this, I invite Dr. Sanjay Ghosh to speak on his concepts of chemical vitiligo, what we described earlier as chemical leukoderma. Sanjay Ghosh, please.
Good evening, everybody. It is indeed my great pleasure to be here with you on this auspicious day of World Vitiligo Day to speak on this topic. And I'm thankful to Brenton Pharma, especially Mr. Nandish Kumar, for inviting me to speak on this subject. And I'm thankful to my moderator, my close friend for very long years, Dr. Sushil Tahiliani, and also my dear friend, Dr. Devinder Prasad, my co-speaker. So today my topic is chemical vitiligo, what's new? Even in this clinical subjects, we should keep in mind physicist Albert Einstein's words, imagination is more important than knowledge. And I've divided my topics into 4 subheadings. One is chemical leukoderma and overview, chemical leukoderma, what's new, and what is the interlink between chemical leukoderma and idiopathic vitiligo, and the journey from chemical leukoderma to chemical vitiligo. Now, first, the overview of chemical leukoderma. By definition, chemical leukoderma is defined as an acquired vitiligo-like depigmentation due to repeated, I want to repeat the word repeated, exposure to specific chemical compounds. That means single insult of a chemical cannot cause chemical leukoderma. That is post-inflammatory depigmentation. And this chemical effect is never dependent on the sensitizing potential of the chemicals. And this is totally different from the post-inflammatory depigmentation or Kubner phenomenon in vitiligo. First, Dr. Oliver in 1939 described this acid cure gloves induced chemical leukoderma, that is monobenzyl ether of hydroquinone. And in India, a first report from Dr. Pandhi from AIMS, that is from Bindi and Footwear, and Professor Bajaj, who has just, we have lost him in this year, has done profound work in this particular field. He described different objects in Indian subcontinent which can cause chemical leukoderma. And this has been reported, has been almost all the country of the world, so has made the globalization complete. Now, Dr. Boise and Dr. Manga, very important author in this field, 2004, they described the etiological agents and etiopathogenesis of chemical leukoderma. They propose that genetic factors make the melanocytes sensitive, and the precipitating factors initiates the programmed cell death or apoptosis, and ultimately, in case of chemical leukoderma, we can know the specific cytotoxic chemicals, but not in case of vitiligo. Now, Lerner, a very important author in vitiligo, that is 1971, put forward this theory that competitive inhibition of tyrosinase, that is phenolic and catecholic derivatives, are structurally similar to melanin precursor tyrosine. But how the cell death and apoptosis occurs, that not has been explained by this theory. And these tyrosines do not alter the sensitivity of the cells to catecholic compounds. But Tada in 2005 has put forward very interesting hypothesis that is elevated TREL, that is tumor necrosis factor related apoptosis inducing ligands, death receptor expression, and heat shock protein. So by this theory, if the melanocytes are exposed to the spores, 4-tertiary butyl phenol, there is some oxidative stress in the cell, and this releases stress protein HSP70. Actually, this is not adequate for the production, and so ultimately it is inducing the TREL expression, and this can also lead to activation of dendritic cells effector functions, and ultimately these dendritic cells are returning to the draining lymph nodes, and ultimately it can cause systemic immunity. So this is an important statement, 2017 by Maggie and Dr. Harris, that vitiligo patients actually lowered sensitivity threshold to the normal stress level, or in fact, they may have increased level of stress than normal individual. And this role of innate immunity is very important because this antigen presenting cell ultimately reaching the draining lymph nodes, they are inviting these autoreactive T cells which secrete cytokines, and ultimately inviting more autoreactive T cells. So there is a very important crosstalk between the adaptive and innate immunity. So ultimately, this innate immunity is acting as a bridge between the cellular stress and the adaptive immunity. And recent documents, they are also showing that in vitiligo patient, this T regulatory mediated control of autoreactive CD8 plus T cells are also lacking. There are a lot of chemicals has been described which can cause chemical leukodystrophy. Mostly these are phenolic or catecholic derivatives. I'm not going into details, you can get any literature. And additional some phenolic derivatives also can cause this. And also sulfhydryl groups apart from this phenolic it can cause. And there are other also materials like this mercurical cinnamic aldehyde in the toothpaste, very common the lip vitiligo. PPD, the hair dye, chloroquine, ammoniated mercury, brilliant lex red, these may all cause chemical leukoderma. And among the common sources, there are lots. Naming few like germicidal detergents, varnish or lacquer resin, insecticide, disinfectants, rubber antioxidant, deodorants, latex glove, formaldehyde resins, paints, etc., etc. This is from rubber gloves. This is chemical leukoderma, but this car, red car, also sometimes it is used as black. This is azo dye, also can cause, I will show later, it can cause chemical leukoderma. Hair dye first described by Taylor in 1993 and Professor Bajaj in 1996 described in India. Also toothpaste I just told, and a lot of other things like tattoo that is containing PPD. Now rubber sandal, very common footwears, amulet string color. So this could be various, even this household object can cause chemical leukoderma apart from the industrial cause. This is from the rubber chappals, this chemical leukoderma we can see. This is from the synthetic leather, that is monobenzyl ether of hydroquinone. It can cause this chemical leukoderma. This is from lipstick. This is from the nail polish. This is from the bindi. Hindu women, they are using this sindoor, also can cause this chemical leukoderma. A lot of the cases reported. And also the alta, the azo dye used by the Hindu women, they can cause chemical leukoderma. This is the necklace string, this color. Again, the azo dye can cause this depigmentation. Even 2.5 months old child is showing that can got this chemical leukoderma from this amulet string color. So this is also an important cause. So early infant. So clinical features of chemical leukoderma is vitiligo-like macules. It can spread to remote area, and even from the contact area it can go to beyond without direct or indirect contact. Confetti macules, very important diagnostic clue, but it is not the totally conclusive of diagnosis. Leukomelanoderma surrounding hyperpigmentation. Also the irritant and allergic contact dermatitis is not a prerequisite, but we sometimes think that leukoderma chemical means there is some irritation or allergy. Not that. It is not at all related to the allergy or irritation. This is confetti macules. So this is very, any rapidly spreading vitiligo can develop this, but chemical leukoderma is rapidly spreading sometime. It can have this confetti macules. This is leukomelanoderma. This we can see the pigmentations. This is also the leukomelanoderma. And in histologically, we won't get any difference between vitiligo and chemical leukoderma. So as per management, counseling to detect the cause is very, very important before starting treatment. Strict and permanent removal of cause, that I'll also describe later. This permanent removal is very important. And by treatment, PUVA, narrowband or low-dose steroid pulse or 308 Excimer we can use. And early cases where if we can withdraw the causes very early, then prognosis is definitely excellent. And after implementation, we are not getting usually recurrence. Now, what's new in this topic, chemical leukoderma? We reported largest case series in the world up till now, 864 cases, in this British Journal of Dermatology in 2009. And this is our paper, Chemical Leukoderma Clinico-Etiological Study of 864 cases in the perspective of a developing country. And these had been cited in innumerable journals. Till now, it is every month it is being cited. And this has been also quoted in almost all textbook on vitiligo and many dermatological textbook. And this is also a path-breaking article on current opinion in immunology. That's innate immune mechanism in vitiligo, danger from within. That actually changed our view about this pathogenesis of vitiligo. So they have also quoted our paper. So they have also got clue from our paper. So what is the main statement from our paper? That chemical leukoderma may be associated with idiopathic vitiligo. Face, we got the commonest involvement, scalp with the least. We got mostly household objects as the cause. That is in comparison with a developed country because their objects are much more standardized than Indian one. And we first uttered the word chemical vitiligo in respect of this word. Previously, it was thought chemical leukoderma is completely different from vitiligo. We observed that even after offending chemicals for 1 year, new vitiliginous patches can appear even in the remote area. We term these cases as chemical vitiligo, and it was accepted in British Journal. And we got that therapeutic response better in pure chemical leukoderma. And we got hair dye as the commonest cause, 27.4%. It could be both self-uses or connubial exposure. Deodorants, detergents, adhesive bindi, etc. Lots of other causes we can got. You can get in the literature. And this is from the hair dye. We can see this is from the Mostek hair dye. This is other world, other country. They have also reported such chemical leukoderma from hair dye. This is from US, one important paper. Also, this can come from the black socks. This is a PPT derivative. Also, the black shoes. So these you are getting lots. And also from the deodorant, it can come. It can come from the sticker. We can see the azo dye of the sticker can causing this depigmentation. So there are various terminology like chemical leukoderma, contact leukoderma, occupational leukoderma. But contact leukoderma is a misnomer because this can appear even in a non-contact area, very remote to the place of contact. So this is not a rational name. Occupational leukoderma previously used, but we have seen many cases from the household objects. So occupational leukoderma will be misnomer, and chemical leukoderma, I think we proposed as a more rational term in comparison to others. Now, how we can explain these different clinical and etiological features of chemical leukoderma? Actually, we explained by syndromic approach, and in our this paper we made these stages. That the first stage, this is akin to this allergic contact dermatitis syndrome as proposed by these international allergic contact dermatitis associations. Stage 1, we propose that chemical leukoderma only at the site of contact. Stage 2 is a local spread of chemical leukoderma through lymphatics beyond the site of contact. And stage 3 is distant hematogenous spread beyond the site of contact. When we publish this paper, those people are not aware of this distant spread of chemical leukoderma. But now almost all the literature, they have 100% confirmed of this distant spread apart from the non-contact area. This is from stage 1, that is from the hand gloves, rubber gloves. People are using hand gloves nowadays very commonly, but this can cause chemical leukoderma. People will be aware of that. And this is from rubber chappos, but it is going to distant area. You can see this is a lymphatic spread. This is the people are getting this red bangles. These are actually not poly. It is instead of, it is actually plastic material. So this can cause chemical leukoderma, and ultimately hematogenous. It can go beyond the site of contact. Now stage 3B is actually same, but it is along with some systemic organ involvement. And stage 3C, it is akin to this systemic contact dermatitis, which is reported, now very common subject of latest discussion. Systemic introduction by injection, inhalation, or ingestion, other than skin contact, this can cause chemical leukoderma. And this is we already described, that is even after 1 year of stopping, we can get vitiligo-like patches in the different, what we termed as chemical vitiligo. Now, Boise, a legendary author in this field, in his book on the vitiligo, he actually welcomed our staging, and he told that this staging system seems very appropriate for occupational and contact leukoderma. Now, how we can diagnose chemical leukoderma clinically? Because there is no reliable or ethically acceptable laboratory test, and patch test is not ethical, and patch test methods and other also not described properly by any authority. So this is by clinical diagnostic criteria, what we proposed in our published article. This is first acquired vitiligo-like depigmented lesion, history of repeated exposure to specific chemical compound, patterned vitiligo-like macules conforming to the site of exposure, and number 4, Conferi macules. If any 3 among these above 4 criteria are present, we can clinically diagnose chemical leukoderma syndrome. And this diagnostic criteria has been accepted by a textbook like Andrews Disease of Skin. They are repeatedly mentioning in all their edition, even the latest edition. Now, what's the interlink between chemical leukoderma and idiopathic vitiligo? This is very important book, Clinical and Basic Immunodermatology, by this Gasperi and other authors. They are actually raising the question whether vitiligo and chemical leukoderma are same or different disorder. We all know that chemicals can destroy melanocyte. That is proved beyond doubt. And many chemicals in the food, beverage, plants may be actually toxic to melanocytes and can cause leukoderma. So definitely one can postulate that all vitiligo are chemically induced, but the chemicals are not yet detected in all the cases. Now, Galen in 1970, he postulated that some of the idiopathic vitiligo in fact may be environmentally or occupationally induced leukoderma. Fisher, very important authority in our dermatological science, in 1976, he told that some of the case of vitiligo, idiopathic vitiligo, may be due to unsuspected inhalation or ingestion of chemical, what we termed as the systemic chemical leukoderma. And Dr. Bell, Professor Bell, very important father figure in Indian dermatology, he also did a very important observation as old as 1971. He recorded this. The incidence of vitiligo was found to be higher in villagers living near dyeing, printing, or carpet industries. Now, Cummings and Nolan, a very, very important author, they have also commented like some forms of vitiligo vulgaris are in fact chemical leukoderma caused by unidentified melanocytotoxic chemicals in the environment. And this is JAD article 2011, vitiligo, they have done this continuing medical education. And this elaborate article, they have also mentioned in details our chemical leukoderma, and also they have mentioned that it can go beyond the site of contact. Now, this is our another important article we published internationally. This is effect of chemical exposure in induction and evolution of vitiligo, correlation between duration of exposure and disease, site of exposure and onset, and impact upon avoidance. So there we got 94.6% household chemical exposure, whereas only 0.4% we got industrial chemicals. And the duration of the disease and the duration of the chemical had no correlation. And we asked the patient to actually avoid the offending chemicals, but those who were fully compliant, we got the difference between them and the non-compliant person. It was definitely the progression of disease is halting, statistically significant difference. But who are partial compliant, and with the comparison with the non-compliant, this is not simple. So we have to permanent and out restriction of the cause. Otherwise, we can't get the result, because this we sometimes get in clinical practice. And correlation of the site of the chemical exposure with the site of onset, we got 64.9%. This is another landmark article on this particular topic, that is by Glassman et al. Actually, they told that oxidant stress actually important cause of vitiligo, and the interplay between reactive oxygen species and the immune system in the pathogenesis of vitiligo they have defined. And they actually they commented that the Role of exogenous oxidants in vitiligo. Actually, the same mechanism may operate behind the chemical leukoderma and this idiopathic vitiligo. And depigmentation in both the cases can spread to the distant sites, and depigmentation in both cases occurs from loss of melanocytes. Now, this Manga et al., they are also very important author. They told that if we understand the mechanism by which 4-tertiary butyl phenol cause melanocyte death, we can also understand the pathology behind the contact vitiligo as well as the idiopathic vitiligo. This paper I already told is a path-breaking paper. This actually they're telling that there is cellular stress ultimately causing the innate signaling, and which is ultimately leading to this adaptive autoimmune process, and this environmental insult and also the ultraviolet light and chemical phenols can invite this process. This very interesting paper published 2015 that in Japan a new skin lightening cream among those who have used 16,000 people developed vitiligo, 2% of the all users, and the basic ingredient was rhododendron, and report depigmentation was found 5%, and this lesion was mostly indistinguishable from vitiligo clinically and histologically. So now journey, what we started 2009 as chemical leukoderma, our large papers, and then ultimately we are going to this chemical vitiligo. We commented that stage 4, that those who are spreading even after stopping 1 year of exposure. So this is chemical vitiligo. So these gave first clue of the possible relationship between chemical leukoderma and vitiligo. And Dr. Harris, very important author in this field of vitiligo, this is a very important article, that is 2017 in Dermatology Clinics. So he wanted to introduce this term chemical induced vitiligo in tune of our our thinking process. And he also wanted to use this eliminate chemical, he wanted to use chemical induced vitiligo, because he's telling that skin depigmentation after exposure from chemical fellows actually resembles vitiligo. And actually clinically, histologically and pathologically, the chemical induced vitiligo and non-chemical induced vitiligo is same spectrum. So he wanted to use this chemical induced vitiligo. So this is actually supporting our long old hypothesis that it is actually vitiligo, it is nothing else. Now, Indian Journal of Dermatology, just recent November-December 2020 issue, I wrote an elaborate review article on this chemical vitiligo. If you are interested, you can go through these articles. Now, previously we knew chemical leukoderma as a distinct separate disease from vitiligo, but the recent scientific exploration actually proving that beyond doubt that both the elements are almost similar in etiology, clinical feature, and histopathology. Indeed, where the diagnosis of chemical vitiligo when we are doing, actually in this way we can exclude many cases of idiopathic nature of vitiligo. And in small number of non-chemical induced vitiligo also, if we do further elaboration and careful history taking, so before stamping is the idiopathic vitiligo, we should always explore this, any other precipitating factors are there or not. So chemical leukoderma can definitely be considered a subset of vitiligo, and chemical triggering factor is actually causing induction and progression of vitiligo. So take home message is actually chemical leukoderma should always be excluded before diagnosis of case of idiopathic vitiligo by proper history taking and proper clinical examination. And in our country, like developing country like India, householders consumer codes are more important rather than industrial agents. And chemical leukoderma, I already told repeatedly, that can spread to beyond the site of contact. And even after avoiding 1 year of offending chemicals, new vitiligo patches can still appear in the remote area, that will be termed as chemical vitiligo. And we can diagnose this chemical leukoderma by our proposed clinical criteria clinically. And these chemical triggering factors play a definite role in induction and progression of vitiligo. So chemical leukoderma should nowadays be called as chemical vitiligo, and definitely chemical leukoderma vitiligo can be considered as a subset of vitiligo. So let's dream for a day when not a single skin disease will remain idiopathic, will get cause each and every skin disease. So thank you all. Thank you for patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for such forcefully put forward arguments based on evidence. With this, now we'll first move on to the next topic, which is on contemporary management of vitiligo by none other than Professor Devendra Prasad. I invite him to please take the stage.
Thank you, sir. So let me share my screen. I think there is. I think it is not letting me
Sir, screen sharing is done, sir.
Yeah, but I'm not able to share from this. It's showing open system preferences, but it never asks. I need to check the properties. I don't know. It's not allowing me to share.
Could you please otherwise mail it to them through the Google Drive and they can try?
Yeah, I don't know. This has never happened. This is for the first time. I'm not able to open this system preferences. It never asked earlier. I think I'm getting call. Hello. Hello.
Mute. You have to unmute yourself.
I'll just log out and rejoin and see how it's.
Fine, sir.
Just give me 2 minutes.
Could I have a few questions for Dr. Sanjay Ghosh's topic in the meantime? So, Dr. Ghosh,
Yes.
how do you differentiate a patient who has a patterned depigmentation on areas of contact of the chemical and it does not progress beyond forever and still think it's vitiligo and not damage caused by a cytotoxic effect of the chemical? And how do you, so that means it depends on the inherent property of the patient that it may remain confined to that area or it may go to remote areas, because some of them have lesions confined to the area of contact forever.
Yes. Yes, actually, this is true. You are very correct that some patients have inherent tendency to actually, and also I think it is not only the genetic factor, also the virulence of the chemicals, because how much toxic it is to their melanocytes. And number two, also body immunity is here very important, because this remote play actually spreading occurring from the actually our I explained this. This is innate immunity cells These are carrying these actually chemicals to the local lymph nodes, and this is my now dendritic cells now carrying over, and then the T cells are ultimately autoimmunity appearing. So definitely the immune mechanism of the particular patient is important here. How his immune system is tackling these particular chemicals. So many patients we have seen like bindis, after using bindi, they are having this depigmentation only localized to the bindi area. This is I told stage one.
Correct. So they don't have any lymphadogenous, they have no lymphatic spread and no hematogenous spread.
Yes, because this depends on this actually immunological system of the body. See, if Dr. Prasad is ready now.
Yeah.
So I think this actually depending on the immunological system of the patient.
Right. Now, the toothpaste and hair dyes are used very, very commonly. Everybody uses a toothpaste. I was just wondering if somebody has on the lip and it's the acromucosal vitiligo, how do you differentiate from the toothpaste induced chemical vitiligo, and how do you counsel such patients about how to brush their teeth?
Actually, in our study, we have elaborated the history. Actually, we have seen the colored toothpaste. The red toothpaste is the most common offender. White toothpaste, because cinnamic aldehyde is normally causing this chemical depigmentation, but many patients can tolerate that. But the colored toothpaste, in our practice, also in our series, also we have done. I've seen mostly the red toothpaste is the culprit. So after it stopping, we have seen it is not spreading. So it is actually the color, I think, is most important. Also sometimes cinnamically. And so this this acral and mucosal, that is lip tip syndrome, what you were talking
Correct.
about. So this could be definitely certain chemical factors could be beyond, because this is chemicals by history. We are taking by the patient, but we cannot actually explore the patient's life pattern. So by
So I think
ready now.
we can continue after the second
Yes, yes.
presentation.
Sure, always,
The question answer. Yeah.
always.
So yeah, please.
Okay, so I apologize.
No,
So
please.
I think finally it's up. So shall I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me this opportunity on this auspicious day of World Vitiligo Day, where we are sort of for a patient sport. So we are discussing among doctors, as well as one major activity is to educate subjects with vitiligo about vitiligo. So I'm happy to share this stage with our another great speaker, Dr. Ghosh, and Dr. Talani sir as a moderator. So as Dr. Talani mentioned about the vitiligo as sort of not an orphan or just like a step mother or stepfather treatment given to vitiligo, but now is probably an exciting phase for vitiligo, because now the vitiligo research is in fashion. Pharmaceutical company are getting interested into the research, because probably the one of the major reason is now that jigsaw puzzle of destruction of melanocytes, they are falling in place. So we are getting some beautiful inroad into the pathomechanism of vitiligo, and I'm sure in the next few years we will have a breakthrough in the management of vitiligo, and this would be a matter of personal satisfaction, which we have taken journey over last about 28 years focusing on vitiligo. So just this is what by definition dermatologists call it an acquired depigmentation divide of melanocytes. But you see, from patients' perspective, it is their worst patch, as has been highlighted by Dr. Tahliani by giving an example like how a small patch of vitiligo can affect the quality of life of whole of the family. So I mean, Dr. Ghosh has already mentioned about some of the pathomechanism, but I will be discussing this pathomechanism from a clinician's perspective. So I will be just looking at the end result, how we can make use of our recent understanding of this pathomechanism. So in nutshell, the vitiligo, the damage can be seen as sort of a dance between three partners. So there is a genetic risk is there, and in the presence of autoimmunity and triggering factors, so it leads to the destruction of melanocytes. So this is one of the convergence theory or sort of emerging pathomechanism pathway. There can be certain melanocyte defects like melanocytorazy, which can be an initial event, and then the presence of oxidative stress. So then finally, this pathomechanism, immune mechanism sets in through the CXCL9-10 interferon gamma pathway. And this is what is the major pathway which is being targeted through this JAK-STAT inhibitors. So just to simplify, so there is a fight going between good T cells versus bad T cells. So the balance is towards more of bad T cells. So as of now, what we are doing is why we are trying to remove this bad T cell with immunosuppressive agents or broad spectrum immunosuppressive agents. So the future modality would be, can we attract the good T cells to the patch so that the balance can be tilted in the favor of good T cells? So this is also a new hope for vitiligo. Like this treatment, like here, this in vitro paper, they have shown that when CCL2 is activated, it can attract the T cells to the patch. So this could be, this kind of therapy could be a lifelong stability, which is only a dream as of now, especially in non-segmental vitiligo, which can induce a lifelong stability. That would be an ideal treatment. So this is also one of my favorites. It looks a more of basic, but here is a clue for the future therapies. So as I mentioned, in vitiligo, what we are seeing is with even use of broad spectrum immunosuppressives like oral minipulse and other, we do stabilize the disease, but it comes back after, say, sometimes like few years, few months to few years, or even after many years. So what could be the reason? So our friend Dr. Khalid has shown that the bad T cell, the cytotoxic T cells remain in the border, the patch, for quite some time, even after successful repigmentation. So this is that if we can target this interleukin 15 and its receptor, which is CD122. So if we target this, if we block this, so there will be no cytotoxic cells remaining at the patch of the vitiligo. So that can give rise to the lifelong stability. So the blocking the interleukin 15 or the CD122, these are the future options. I think some of are in the phase 1 trial, which can induce a lifelong stability in vitiligo. So this is another, like if you see a case like this, so it's very difficult to repigment, but it does repigment sometimes. So the question is from where the pigment is coming, because the normal teaching, we have been taught that the reservoir is in outer root sheath, and then probably after stimulation, so they comes and repigment, repopulate, and then result in repigmentation. So we question like from where this pigmentation, although it's very rare, but we have seen in some of the patient, especially on PUVA salt therapy, so showing repigmentation. So from where this pigmentation is coming? So in the meantime, I think in around 2012, there was one paper where they have shown that in the normal skin that dermal stem cells can be converted into viable melanocytes. So we took the biopsy from the dorsum area, and then in lab, we could convert them into viable melanocytes. So this is a new hope. Like if we can stimulate these dermal stem cells, so even resistant patches can show a repigmentation. So I will just give an example, one or two examples which we are following in our lab. So this is a paper by our friend Thierry Pesseron from France, where they have shown that the repigmentation path is through Wnt pathway. So if we stimulate this Wnt pathway, so it leads to the repigmentation. So this could be a sort of like any residents or any like young dermatologists who are interested in basic research. So this is how we start working. So after reading this paper, we thought of what drug can induce this Wnt pathway. So we shortlisted lithium chloride, And in our lab, we have prepared very simple mouse model with this using hydroquinone. So with the chemical depigmentation. So here we have shown that application of topical lithium chloride can lead to significant repigmentation. So now we are working on another Wnt pathway agonist, so to enhance the repigmentation. Now coming to the crux of the management, so which would be helpful, which I'm going to share our approach to the subject with vitiligo. So whenever the patient comes, so our two aims are there. One is stabilization. If patient is showing active depigmentation, we need to stabilize first. Then we work on repigmentation strategy. And if no further repigmentation is possible, then comes the role of surgical modality. So I will be briefly touching because we all know this modality. So I will be discussing when should we use which type of modality. So it should mean not be like a blanket treatment for all vitiligo patient, like patient comes and you give a standard sort of treatment to every patient. So first we need to assess in which phase the patient comes to us. Is our aim is stabilization or is our aim is repigmentation? So phototherapy is mainstay, which can act through both pathways. It can stabilize the disease or it can repigmentation is quite quick with this phototherapy. So I will not touch much upon this because we all know phototherapy is the mainstay. So I will be focusing like how we can further add to the efficacy of phototherapy by combining it with other modalities. So there is a lot of publication on oxidative stress, a lot of in vitro data, like how this oxidative stress can be an initial event. So then probably comes then what is the role of antioxidant? As such, there are not many evidence-based study, but based on our experience, we have seen that antioxidant does work. So it can be used in early stage. I call it as like a sort of a watchman, as we say in cricket. So they can be sent to save the like a good batsman from, I mean, that fast bowler at the fag end of the day. So if they can, sometimes even the watchman can make a century. So this is that kind of therapy. This is safe. This can be given in early stage in a slowly spreading vitiligo. So what the question is, which is the best antioxidant? As such, we don't know. So we can rotate. So I call it a rotational antioxidant therapy with the polypodium licotomase, ginkgo biloba, multivitamins, vitamin E, A, and C combination. So they can be rotated because they are quite safe as compared to the broad spectrum immunosuppressives or other even JAK inhibitors extra. So in this paper, we have shown that ginkgo biloba is effective in slow spreading vitiligo. Similarly, minocycline. So there was one paper in vitro, they have shown that minocycline protects melanocyte against oxidative damage. So we thought of trying it. So we published an open study and then compared with oral mini pulse. So it's again effective in slow spreading vitiligo. So I just want to highlight here, sometimes dermatologists say there is a one report of minocycline helpful in vitiligo. They start trying in a patient comes with a very rapidly spreading and they give minocycline and they say, oh, it is not effective. So this is not like that. So you have to have an indications, like if it's a slow spreading, few lesions are coming up in the initial stage of presentation when there is not a florid immune angle to the vitiligo. So in that stage, they are going to be helpful, and other role in maintenance. Once we have used a stronger immunosuppressives to stabilize the disease, then we can use this as a maintenance therapy. So this is, I think, with all our dermatologists, this oral mini pulse remains the mainstay. Initially, the dermatologists from States or from Europe, they were saying the dermatologists from India are very aggressive. They are using steroid for disease like vitiligo. But this is a matter of personal satisfaction. Now it has been in their guideline. In USA, they are following this protocol of using oral mini pulse for stabilizing the disease. And here what we have done is as oral mini pulse therapy, which has been suggested by Dr. Pasricha. So we have further half the doses of this oral mini pulse therapy. So we are using 2.5 milligram of dexamethasone on 2 consecutive days per week, which is half the standard oral mini pulse. And to our mind, vitiligo is such a disease which require lower doses of immunosuppressives as compared to alopecia areata or psoriasis, which need higher doses. So we can use lower doses for longer term. That's an advantage here in vitiligo. So this is a data of about more than 2,000 patients from our clinic, where we have shown that oral mini pulse in a lower doses at half the doses can stabilize the disease in more than 80% of the patients. The question is how long? So this is very tricky question. So what we use in our clinic, we give it for 3 months and then see if there are new lesions coming up. Then we keep giving it for another 3 months. So it's in a hit and sort of trial method. So you can try stopping it. If it disease stabilized, then okay. If it again new lesion coming up, then again you can start this oral mini pulse therapy in a lower doses. Similarly, we have found a low dose of methotrexate, like 7.5 to 10 milligram, is also effective in stabilizing the disease. And similarly, other immunosuppressives, depending on dermatologist's experience of using these, can be tried, and they are more or less effective. Azathioprine, mycophenolate mofetil, cyclosporine, and we published a paper on cyclosporine as well, which is as good as oral mini pulse therapy in stabilizing the disease. So now we are moving toward from steroid to the JAK inhibitor. So there was few initial reports in 2015 where tofacitinib was used, because this pathway of interferon gamma CXCL10, and if we act at this pathway, so it will as good as no vitiligo. So although they are not a magic treatment, but they have a very good role in the management, and I think they will be a mainstay in near future in the management of vitiligo. And we have also started using it quite often now, because now more economically like cheaper options with the tofacitinibs are available. So we have started using it. So again, ruxolitinib is also another treatment, and similarly, this is a topical ruxolitinib has come, which can play a role. And this is a paper in the Lancet where they have shown that 1.5% twice daily is quite effective, and they have very clearly shown how this can fit in the pathomechanisms, and it can give a good response in the management of vitiligo. So there are future analogs, JAK-STAT inhibitors, which are in the pipeline. So now coming to our second aim of repigmentation. So we can use topical steroids, topical calcineurin inhibitors, growth factors, vitamin D3 analog, prostaglandins. So I already mentioned the phototherapy is still the mainstay of repigmentation. So this is also one of my favorite slides, because in vitiligo, we are focusing on melanocyte, poor melanocyte. We are just saying that they are involved in vitiligo, but probably all the cells are defective, as we have shown by cultural characteristics of keratinocytes and fibroblasts from the depigmented patch. They also shows different growth patterns, and they are morphological defective with the different growth factors milieu. So probably all the cells are defective. We should focus on keratinocytes and fibroblasts as well. So this is how this melanocyte is dependent on growth factors secreted by keratinocytes and fibroblasts like ACTH, alpha MSH, ET1, BFGF, nerve growth factor. So we know this alpha MSH analogs, afamelanotide is available, and this topical BFGF, we have some experience in the management of vitiligo. So similarly, afamelanotide 16 milligram implant, they help in augmenting the phototherapy. So this is used in combination with narrowband UV therapy as subcutaneous implant, monthly implant. So it increases the speed of repigmentation, and repigmentation is more complete. So this could be a one option when patient is not showing an optimal response to the phototherapy. Similarly, the BFGF is a very good sort of chemoattractant for melanocyte. So I always say that it can induce marginal type of repigmentation as it attracts the melanocyte from the border. So even patches with leukotrichia, sometimes they can show marginal type of repigmentation. But again, like I want to highlight, like we as a dermatologist, we say, okay, we try VFGF and we think of comparing it with topical steroids or TCI, but it does not act like that. It's very slow. So one has to be very patient. So same thing is with vitamin D3, like calcipotriol. So some of the dermatologists found it not much useful, but some dermatologists who know when to use it and what to expect. So, and which sites, that is most important. So this medicine has a different role. So if you are using BFGF, so your aim should be different. So patches with leukotrichia, smaller patches when combined with phototherapy, because it can induce marginal type of repigmentation over the acral area. So like here, this was a patch with leukotrichia, so it showed quite a good repigmentation coming from the margin. So recently we have shown the combination of BFGF with tacrolimus work better than tacrolimus alone. So I'll just mention about this prostaglandin. As again, we tried this as a first about 18 years back, because our friend Jelfa Abdul Malik, researcher, basic cell researcher from US, she mentioned that prostaglandin analogs are one of the most potent stimulator of melanocyte. And this line catched my attention. So then I start searching what we can offer to the patient of a stable vitiligo to induce repigmentation. At that time only that gynecological preparation was available. So I tried this gynecological PGE2. So it found to be effective in a open pilot study. And now we know we have many other analogs, latanoprost, vimatoprost, which are much more effective. Like this patient had loss of eyelashes and depigmentation, and with latanoprost eye drops, there was regrowth of eyelashes as well as repigmentation. So, but again, I want to highlight here, prostaglandin analog are again a very good molecule and need to be watched for their efficacy. But because we are using ophthalmological preparation, which are not optimum preparation, we need a dermatological preparation with proper base for penetration, with proper concentration, that would be effective. And I understand one French company is working on it. So this is again going to be good supportive role in the topical management of vitiligo. So I will just briefly over the next 2-3 minutes. I think I have okay 3-4 minutes. So my second passion of vitiligo management, surgical management of vitiligo. So here, non-cultured epidermal cell suspension has changed the horizon of surgical management of vitiligo, because we can treat extensive area and any area can be treated with this non-cultured epidermal cell suspension. And even we are moving toward where we can even offer surgical treatment for stabilizing the disease. So that could be a very exciting option in the management, surgical management of vitiligo. So this was a comparison between the tissue graft versus cellular graft. So we found cellular grafting has advantage over tissue graft like suction blister epidermal grafting, because it's safe and effective. We can treat larger area, color match is excellent. We can treat difficult to treat area very easily. So here the simple principle of giving melanocyte to the patches, dividomelanocyte. So 3 steps: taking graft, trypsinization, and then application of suspension over dermabraded area. So it was started by Gauthier as a 2-day procedures, where they used to raise cryo blister and then inject the suspension in the cryo blisters. And now it has been simplified, a 1-day procedure. And this is a conventional method. And there are many modifications. Like we have started using this for a dermabrasion, very easy, without any blood splash, with this probe. So single pass, low voltage. So we can very smoothly dermabrade for application of suspension. So the results are excellent. I will just run through these photographs. So there is a significant improvement of white hair as well. So which is very important advantage with non-cultured surgical, non-cultured epidermal cell suspension as a surgical modality in vitiligo. So significant improvement of leukotrichia. So again, now the source can be the hair follicle, because hair follicle are rich in melanocyte stem cells, which are there in the outer root sheath. And they can also, because we know the melanocyte, the ratio is much higher in this hair follicle suspension, we expect it to be effective as compared to when we prepare it from the skin graft. But in this study, we found that they are more or less the same as compared in this. This was this patch was done with follicular cell suspension. Again, this was hair follicle cell suspension. So there are many modification or simplification. So we have labeled this simplified 4-compartment method, where there is no lab support is required. Any dermatologist who have a minor OT setup where he or she is doing electric cauterization, they can perform this simplified 4-compartment method. And recently we have come up with various combination of non-cultured epidermal cell suspension with hair follicle cell suspension, or even combining melanocyte, dermal melanocyte stem cells. So this is what our 4-compartment, because I will not take much, I will not talk much about this, but it's very simplified, where you can, the results are as good as conventional method. Again, in the same slide, to show that we are just focusing on melanocyte, but we need healthy keratinocytes as well as fibroblasts. So that's why we combined it with hair follicle cell suspension plus epidermal cell suspension, both good melanocyte stem cells, good keratinocyte, and some of the fibroblasts in our dermal melanocyte stem cells. And in this paper, we have shown that this combination works better than this non-cultured epidermal cell suspension alone. So recently, we have started adding dermal melanocyte stem cells along with this epidermal graft preparation with non-cultured epidermal cell suspension. So idea of using dermal melanocyte stem cell was that because here one of the paper in PLOS mentioned that these dermal melanocyte stem cells, they act as sort of immunostimulant or immunostabilizing. So that's why I mentioned, can we use the surgical management for stabilizing the patch? So we combine this to give a local stability to the patch. So we combine this dermal stem cells with the epidermal suspension. So we published in this paper in JAMA Dermatology. They got interested in this paper specifically on surgical, which is quite rare for JAMA Dermatology because they are more toward clinical or basic research. So we have shown when we combine it with dermal stem cells, so probably we can stabilize, but we need a long-term study to see if they are really stabilizing. Here we have chosen 3-month stability patches of just 3 months stable patches for surgical management by combining the epidermal cell with dermal stem cell. So results are as good with this combination as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prashad. So with this, without wasting time, we should use the rest of the time of this webinar to get more information from both of you. First, I'll ask you a few of my questions that I have formulated, and then we'll take questions from the attendees.
Sure.
So it would be interesting, Dr. Ghosh, to see the difference between people who use a toothpaste and people who use a neem herbal, whether we see any mucosal depigmentation in such people, or they're protected because they're using something natural.
No.
That's your comments. And one
you
more thing is-
clarify,
yeah.
please. You once repeat the question.
So, when people use that neem stem,
Neem.
for cleaning their teeth and not the chemical toothpaste? You think they are better off? They're protected?
No, I don't think so, because ultimately, if it is a neem, it is not purely made of neem. It is a lot of preservatives, lot
No,
of
no. When people use a neem,
only neem, only
only neem, yeah.
only. Now, only neem may not cause chemical leukoderma, but neem we know as a contact dermatitis person that neem can cause contact dermatitis. It is
Right.
allergic because in our Indian series of standard battery, previously neem was also a ingredient. Now we have omitted because people are not using that. So neem can cause contact allergy, but depigmentation up to now not reported.
Yeah. Now you said that for successful treatment, they should avoid the thing absolutely and for the rest of their life. Now, the list that you showed was quite formidable. So when you see somebody who's got a chemical vitiligo, what is your counseling about what they should use, what they should not use? Because it will be, I have found it will be very challenging to avoid all those things absolutely and for the rest of their life. I would like you to give us some idea about how you counsel your patients.
Now, actually, I tell them in two ways. First thing, this you know, this is your disease and this was caused by this. So if you want to eliminate the disease, you have to avoid, say, rubber chappals, if the people can get chemical leukoderma. So today, after vomiting, he is cured. We have a lot of patients you have seen after vomiting, say, hair dye. One interesting example I'm giving, a young girl about 10 years was bought by her parents, and they are almost crying. Their parents were crying that on the posterior, that occipital area, she got a vitiligo. So some doctors told it is vitiligo. So I told them it is vitiligo, but there could be some reason. So I counseled the parents, and ultimately they told no cause was done. And after 1 or 2 days, they rang me up. And they told the girl's grandmother using hair dye, and on that pillow, that most of the time that child is lying down, and their parents are off in the office. So ultimately, I gave no treatment, and ultimately just by counseling the patient got cured. So this is actually also that parents still now tell me this thing. So by counseling we can get many of the patient we can cure, but lifelong is a definitely very big thing what you have told. Even allergic contact dermatitis we tell you have to stop this, but I explain in different ways. Say if you are allergic to egg, say you can't take egg. In future we don't know whether you could take. It is a lifelong you have to stop. So if you are allergic to rubber, or if you are too allergic to hair dye, or if hair dye is cause of the chemical leukoderma, so in future you should better. So what I gave, I give some substitute which is not containing PPD. Say hair dye, those got particularly chemical leukoderma from hair dye. I give PPD. Some uh, these are available hair dye which are without any PPD. So that sometimes patient can use, and they are
Correct.
allergic free.
So we got your point. So you tell them to avoid that particular chemical, not the entire list of which what has been described as
No,
a
no,
potential cause,
no. We
which may not
actually
be relevant for that patient.
now particularly that patient what he got, I particularly tell
All
them
right.
that you should avoid this, but at the same time I give the list that this could be caused. You should be watchful. Not everything you have to avoid, because every
Now,
people is not allergic to everything.
now, many of them, they ask us about the advice because Dr. Farshad, you talked about antioxidants. A lot of them, they ask us about what to eat, what not to eat. You think there's any science in giving them a dietary advice about the antioxidants and all that? What would your advice to patients be? They have that clear, weird concept about avoiding all the sour things and all that. So, what is the science about dietary advice in people with vitiligo?
Yeah. So the first and foremost, this is a very important question. So whenever we during our physical vitiligo world day, we have interaction with patients. So this is the most common thing is lots of myths surrounding the dietary habits, so many restrictions. So this is a very clear message, no dietary restrictions. So like there people are avoiding white color like milk, curd, or some are saying like taking fish after milk. So as such, absolutely no dietary restriction in that regard that can directly induce vitiligo. But certain diet can help, like with rich in antioxidant properties, natural fruits, so even like patients are not taking vitamin C, and some of our old dermatologists, they are saying, avoiding of vitamin C. Initially, it was debatable. So now it's not debatable. It's very clear message. Patient can take vitamin C because vitamin C, there is no role that it can directly affect, because the major damage here is the immune damage to the melanocyte. So all these things can, like we know, vitamin C help in some decrease in pigmentation, but that doesn't mean it can induce vitiligo.
Fine.
So no dietary restriction.
Thank you.
As
Message well taken.
for vitiligo.
When we have children at the age of 2.5, 3 years having vitiligo, and it's spreading, at that age, what is the treatment therapeutic algorithm that you follow? Because we did talk about the immunosuppressives, we did talk about the JAK inhibitors. So in a small child, would your approach be different or it would be the same?
Yeah, if you say like 2 to 3, this is a critical, like I would say. So one has to not to be very aggressive with these immunosuppressive for such a child. But like say like 5 to 6 years, so then many options comes in. So, but that is the age, like 5 to 6 years is the usually majority may can be present in the childhood vitiligo, but not some of rare cases. A few cases can show vitiligo at early age, like 2 to 3 years. So this is again the safest option would be if after trying the topical management, if still there is active depigmentation, so we can use a low dose steroid therapy to stabilize for such a child, avoiding the other immunosuppressives.
Right. So you also mentioned that the CD8 cells are present even after total repigmentation.
Yes.
So would you recommend a maintenance treatment in such cases?
Yes.
And
So
what about the stability of the patch when we operate and we know that there are CD8 cells present there? Will it adversely affect the end result of a surgical intervention? And after the patient repigments, would you recommend a maintenance therapy, and for how long?
Yes, sir. This is very important question. I actually missed the maintenance therapy. So this is because this is now clear, like they persist even after successful repigmentation, even 20 years after it has been demonstrated in a patch which was completely repigmented and stable. Still they are lying there. They can get activated anytime with any of triggering factor, maybe chemical, as mentioned by Dr. Sanjay in a very elaborate presentation of chemical vitiligo. So there are many triggering factor. Chemical is one of those. So maintenance therapy, like with the topical tacrolimus, has been published by Thierry Passeron group. So we are also using it, especially over the eyelid. We have seen that after good repigmentation, again, there is a depigmentation after some time. So we give it a maintenance therapy initially alternate day, and then we say like Sunday to Sunday, weekly therapy of topical tacrolimus. And similarly for surgical management, after doing all our procedure, maybe suction blister, epidermal grafting, or non-cultured epidermal cell suspension, we do prescribe like topical tacrolimus a long term, which help in repigmentation as well as stabilizing the surgical induced repigmentation.
And how long will this go on?
So after successful repigmentation, again, we say the patient once a week application to the patch.
For the longest possible time.
Yes, and till they remember using it.
All right. So with your new molecules that we heard from you, what is your contemporary therapeutic algorithm for a patient of vitiligo?
Yes, ruxolitinib and the topical JAK inhibitor, I think affordability would be a concern, but I have seen some of the patient because I was part of that one of the trial of topical JAK inhibitors. So they, as of now, to my mind, they work better than our tacrolimus or topical steroid. So they are going to replace, it depends the time, maybe another 4 or 5 years, as we remember in near about 2000 when tacrolimus came in, and then it becomes, standard treatment from atopic dermatitis to vitiligo to many of other conditions. So similarly, I think this topical JAK inhibitor is going to replace our topical management in vitiligo at least.
And have you used oral tofacitinib in vitiligo?
Yes, now quite often. Initially, we used to have some case who can afford it because it was very costly. But now we have started quite
The
extensively.
generic version.
Yes, generic
And
version.
how long do you prescribe? Like for steroids, we heard that 3 months or then 6
Yes,
months.
again for 3 months, we follow the same protocol, 3 months of tofacitinib. But again, but we are modifying, but we have not data as of now. We are using half the dose of tofacitinib because in our experience, we always found half the dose which we use for psoriasis or alopecia areata effective in vitiligo. So that way we have seen a good response with the half the doses, 2.5 milligram daily
Right.
of
Thank you.
tofacitinib.
Now, this is for both of you. We heard about you have into new development. When we look at the immune mechanism, we read about the DAMPs, type 1 interferon IgN pathway, innate immunity, inflammasomes, interleukin 1 beta, T cells, attack on cytokines, attempt to cause immune tolerance through FOXP3. Which of these you think enthuses you more? Which of you think has got more future and chances of being successful in future? Because these are
Yes.
so many steps in the immune mechanism which people are trying to alter to manage vitiligo. Which of these you think?
Yes,
Yeah,
I can take first
yeah,
with
please.
permission from Dr.
Yeah,
Ghosh.
please.
So because this pathway of interferon gamma, the CXCL9, CXCL10 pathway, acting through this interferon gamma, TNF alpha. So because majority of the treatment are now focusing on this pathway, because one reason is CXCL9 and CXCL10 has shown as a good biomarker. So there are many studies now with it has as a response to the depigmentation. When we see a active depigmentation, it increases, and with treatment it decreases. So this is one of the best biomarkers, CXCL9 and CXCL10. So it is acting through that pathway of TNF alpha and interferon gamma pathway. So all these drug JAK-STAT inhibitors, they are acting through this pathway.
Right. And how would you, two of you, when you see a patient of vitiligo, patient is crestfallen in spite of, how do you counsel? What is the standard counseling advice? And in case of child, counseling for the parents?
Yeah. So this is important. Counseling is also important. So again, there are two aspects. From very beginning, when I went even like 26 years back when I started focusing on vitiligo. So I was very sort of positive, like one day we have breakthrough. So my always like I did not mention that's chemical depigmentation as modality because this becomes one of the option for universal when at least 70% area is involved. But I call it as a negative treatment because we are further damaging the melanocytes. But this is one of the good option. Patient has to be consulted properly. So I always say to the patient, like there are good treatment in the pipeline, and this is the best phase, and this is real. I mean, this is the best phase for vitiligo research because I've seen a company, a major pharmaceutical company, they are interested in vitiligo, and it somewhat resembles the initial phase of psoriasis research.
Right. So you give them guarded optimism. Dr.
Yeah,
Sanjay?
so this
Yeah.
is my approach.
Yeah. Dr.
Actually,
Sanjay Ghosh.
yes. Actually, counseling, I first tell the patient that patient have actually, as Dr. Prasad has rightly told, they have already a lot of beliefs and myths that this drug, this food, this can cause this. So I have to tell this, uh, this is a skin problem, nothing else. This is not a infectious because this is the most important. Many patients are very much worried. Today, also one patient asked me, one elderly patient, that whether it is infectious for their grandchildren. I told first is not infectious. And number two, and it is, there is some cause. Some patient believe that doctors don't know anything about vitiligo because there is no treatment, no cause. So this we tell doctors are doing now research. Now a lot of things are available in our knowledge and a lot of treatments options are available. So these are actually think give good relief to the patient. And I agree with 100% Dr. Prasad that before giving treatment, I first assess in which stage the disease is. I've seen treatment, so the patient is in a very unstable stage. Their treatment of repigmentation is going on. Dr. Prasad has very rightly given that slides that when to treat when actually, if it is unstable, we should stabilize, and then the repigmentation and last of the surgical option. So this is sometimes not protocol is maintained by the doctors. They on the patient is on the repigmentation, they gives treatment for unstable, lot
Right.
of immunosuppressive, etc. So I think this is important, and counseling. I think if we give some time to the vitiligo patient, I think they are much assured. But definitely about the treatment outcome, we give it little open that we don't know which time. Most of the skin disease we can't know. So this is a little open one we can give.
I also tell them that they are not patients. I call them subjects, and tell them it's a disorder and not a disease, and
Yes,
attach their lesions to give them the confidence.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Now we'll take a few questions from, though you have covered in your talk, but there are some questions from the people who are attending. So I'll try and cover some of those before we call it a day. Dr. Punshi wants to know the association of thyroid with vitiligo. So probably he wants to suggest that anti-thyroid antibodies, like how we have autoimmunity involving multiple organs. So if you could please cover.
Yes, this is one of the association with the vitiligo. So we do go for anti-thyroid antibodies, but as such, there is no much significance of the outcome we have seen. The treatment remains the same. So just we can say that this is one of the autoimmune marker for vitiligo as association with vitiligo.
So Dr. Sangoli wants to know whether, Dr. Sanjoy, whether you would recommend, though you have covered, patch testing in chemical vitiligo. And somebody wants to know whether you have seen any Kibnerization in chemical vitiligo.
Okay, these are very interesting questions. First thing, this I mentioned very briefly because of scarcity of time. Actually, patch test, we do allergic contact dermatitis very frequently. This is a standard guideline from our Indian standard, our association SCOT-FI, and also the Abroad International Allergy Group. But in the patch test in chemical leukoderma or chemical vitiligo is not a standardized one. Number two, there are certain problems because chemical leukoderma is not a contact dermatitis. This you have to understand first. So patch test may not eliminate everything. And number two, this is not always ethical because if we do patch test in a patient, that area, by chance that lady or that person can develop a chemical leukoderma patch. So this will be more problematic for the patient. And number two, how many days or weeks after of the chemical exposure will come, nobody knows. So this patch test is not standardized at all. We don't do any patch test in case of chemical leukoderma.
Message well taken, because you also cannot do it repeatedly. You said it has to be repeated contact.
Exactly, repeatedly, and that's why we don't recommend patch test in chemical leukoderma because it is not ultimately pathogenesis completely different than allergic contact dermatitis. And what another question was?
About Kibnerization, which you said,
yes.
probably you said it's vitiligo Kibnerization and not in chemical.
Yeah. Kubnar in vitiligo is a different thing that we all know by traumatic, but chemical leukoderma, sometimes we get exact feature that I told repeatedly by different published paper that is actually pathogenetically, immunopathology, clinically, it is almost similar. So definitely Kubnar also here got, we get lot of confetti macules, which is very much important diagnostic feature of chemical leukoderma, but Kubnar phenomenon as such we are not getting, but definitely as is a rapidly spreading vitiligo, unstable vitiligo we mostly get. So if it is a chemical vitiligo rapidly spreading, we can get Kubnar. That's no problem.
Right.
We can get it.
And we did discuss the CD8 and the humor cell-mediated damage. But somebody wants to know whether you've seen any anti-melanocyte antibody, humoral antibodies, and what's the relevance of those?
Yes, actually, this anti-melanocyte antibody was a topic of discussion 10-20 years back. But now it has been shown in the pathogenesis of vitiligo and chemical vitiligo. This antibody level is not at all correlating with the clinical features or clinical severity. So now actually the immunopathogenesis is totally different area. It is not the antibodies, but learned 30-40 years back who put forward this theory, antibodies. But now antibody instead, what I told in my slides, that first there are some cellular stress, followed by there are some innate immunity, and from this innate immunity, antigen presenting cells are going to the local lymph nodes, and there actually this T cells are more producing, and ultimately it is autotoxic CD8
So
plus. So
which is
that's
cellular autoantibody.
antibodies are not at all contributory.
Right.
So
Thank you.
antivenomous antibody not at all a factor in this is nowadays in the pathogenesis of vitiligo and chemical, because this theory has now
Is
obscured.
outdated. Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Parshad, somebody wants to know whether you've seen any serious adverse effects to tofacitinib usage systemically.
No, this,
Or any,
I mean, quite safe, but monitoring has to be done with a liver function test. And initially, the immunosuppressive workup panel for rule out tuberculosis. Otherwise, quite safe. We've not seen any major side effect.
And we have to just remember that the main action of these is on the lymphoid cells and hematopoietic system. So you have to monitor the hemoglobin and the white cell counts and be sure that those don't drop.
So we are
Is there any comparison between azathioprine, methotrexate, and JAK inhibitors? Any studies?
No, no such study as of now. I mean, direct head-on comparative studies are not available.
Right. So I think with that we covered the questions.
Tushar, you are using half dose of tofacitinib. So
Yeah,
so side effects are, I think, more.
Yeah, we have not
more
seen
top-
any.
more
Yes,
top-
yes, yes.
The main problem is actually infection, chances of infection.
Yeah.
I think as you are using low dose, I think
So there is hardly any risk
also
of
support
even,
the
yes.
low dose.
And-
I think the chances of
Yeah, it is believed that up to 10 milligrams a day is safe. If you go to higher dose, like they use in rheumatoid arthritis, 20 milligrams and all, then you have to be more
infection is more. Yes, yes.
Yeah. And secondly, the cell count and all, white cell count and the hemoglobin drop is more with
Yes.
ruxolitinib and
And
not with the
with the
tofacitinib, because
tofacitinib.
for that you need JAK2, whereas in tofacitinib it is JAK1 and JAK3. All right, thank you. I think with that we have come.
Any phase 3 trial of tofacitinib in vitiligo? Any phase 3 trial?
Tofacitinib, yes, is not. Ruxolitinib is as that phase 3 as topical one is available, but there is no such phase 3 trial with tofacitinib. No, so the results are not yet out.
And I'm sure we have to tell them that what we're using is off-label.
Yeah.
Off-label, yes.
Yeah.
And that also has to be told in the counseling.
For vitiligo, yes.
For vitiligo, yeah. With that, I must thank both of you for having
Thank
given very valuable insight into the subject. And with that, we also come to the end of our questions. And we did exceed the time, but I'm sure it was worth every minute that people spent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tailiani and Dr. Prasad.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, respected Dr. Tailiani, Dr. Ghosh, and Dr. Prasad. It was really an honor and privilege for Brinton Pharmaceuticals to have all three stalwarts of dermatology in India to have with us today on this platform. And I'm sure that the experiences and the therapies which you have shared today would definitely help the dermatologists in India as well as out of India in their clinical practice. And that would be passed on to their vitiligo patients. Thank you so much, sir. Please take care. Have a good night.
Thank you.